This episode of Twin Cities Trekkies is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor before, let me explain. First of all, it's free. There are creation tools that help you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership required. They'll also help you to distribute your podcast so it can be heard on many different platforms, such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's all you need in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, everyone. Welcome to episode 16 of Twin Cities Trekkies. I am Wes.
And I'm Kenzie.
And today, since it is June, we are going to start talking about Pride Month. Because, it's a big deal, obviously, within the last, at least the last 25, 30 years, at least. So we're going to talk about LGBT representation in Star Trek. LGBTQ, excuse me. I should say more politically correct term. It would be LGBTQIA or something like that.
It's encapsulating that basically there are people that exist that's not being heterosexual, Mm-hmm. I think that's a big deal to just be like, it's normal to be everything else too. There's nothing normal about being heterosexual as much as there is being gay or lesbian. So,
yep. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the obvious one from Discovery, which is Dr. Culber and Paul Stamets, and then probably other ones that should have been. We feel that should have been. I think, because there are some there should have been, but it was a different time for TV and stuff like that. So
representation matters, but a lot of people got scared about it, timing it because they can't capitalize on it, which is its own discussion of being mm-hmm. It is important to see representation, but it sucks when it's under the pretense of just garnering money for representing it. When it's you should just do it because it's normal. It's extrememely weird to be in a futuristic setting and suddenly there's only one gay couple represented in a group of 100 people. Everything feels weird.
Yep. So get in touch with us is tctrekkiespodcast@gmail.com is our email address. Feel free to send us an email. We'll gladly read them. You can also comment on our Facebook post, our Instagram post. The handle is TC Trekkies Pod for both Facebook and Instagram. So either way, you're going to find the episode, what it's about from either there, either which one works for you. And also, if we would love to hear your lovely voice. So to send a voice message, you can go to anchor.fm/Twin Cities Trekkies. Once you get there, there's a little button that says message. So click on that button. There should be options for you to send us voice messages, and we would love to hear your voice. So just keep in mind that any feedback you do leave, which would be either written or vocal, just keep in mind that they'll be used in a future episode of Twin Cities Trekkies. Okay, we do have one comment from an episode that aired about 2 weeks ago as we're this recording. The last time we recorded, we had three episodes recorded, episodes 13, 14, and 15, because MacKenzie was on vacation. So we decided to record about 3 weeks ago those three episodes. Unbeknownst
to everyone else, because we released the exact same. So everything falls synchronously the same.
Yeah, exactly. So MacKenzie was on vacation. So about 3 weeks ago, we recorded three weeks worth of shows, and we have a comment from episode 14, which was the episode titled "Who Should Stay or Who Should Go," which was kind of like our version of the Clash's song, Should I Stay or Should I Go? So that was one about the characters who we felt should have stayed and those who should have gotten the heave ho off of Star Trek. So it was my friend Don Crandall. He had said Beverly Crusher should have stayed in TNG season 2. Pulaski was fine, but removing Beverly was a strange and mistake, in my opinion. Yeah, we both agree that that Beverly Crusher probably should have stayed throughout the entire run of Next Generation.
It's a very weird blip in the atmosphere on the show having that.
Yeah, definitely season 2. Yeah, definitely has a paradigm shift. But it is all because of behind the scenes. Because of Maurice Hurley, the head writer of Next Generation, by the end of the first season of Next Generation, and he and Gates McFadden had clashed a lot with how Crusher was written, and that's why it was either him or her who ended up going. So, unfortunately, it ended up being her, but thankfully, they didn't kill her off, like we said.
Fans spoke up. Fan service is always such a beautiful thing.
Yep, and then it's like 22 episodes of this really weird dynamic with Catherine Pulaski and stuff like that. So, I mean, granted, had she actually been written better, like stuff like that.
Yeah, writing is a huge part of that.
Yes, and that's unfortunate for the first 2 seasons of Next Generation. The writing of the show is very, very uneven, because sometimes the writers chose to write the female characters like very they were male writers, and they chose to portray Troy, Tasha, and Crusher as sexist. Which is unfortunate for the first season. It's the first Star Trek in 20 years and stuff like that. And it's unfortunate.
Still had a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah. So in terms of their mindset, yes, definitely. So that's what's unfortunate about the first 2 seasons of Next Generation, is that the writing is very uneven, with the exception of very few good episodes in those 2 seasons, like episodes like we mentioned before, like Conspiracy, Where No One Has Gone Before, The Measure of a Man, Q-Who. Those episodes are really strong because of like certain things that went right for the series, like The Measure of a Man. That's an exceptional episode when you watch the first season of Picard. You gotta watch that before you watch the rest of Picard season 1, because elements from that episode are sprinkled throughout the season. So like there are characters like Dr. Bruce Maddox and the androids and the stuff like that. So and that's a great episode through and through, even without watching Picard. So but yes, definitely. If they had written either Crusher or Pulaski better in the first 2 seasons, either one could have stayed. But it's just her character, unfortunately, Pulaski was unfortunately very well hated. We have internet forums now, but back in the late 80s, when Next Generation season 2 was airing, they let their fans know by like probably letters and letters to Gene Roddenberry, letters to Rick Berman, Paramount itself in general, saying like, we hate this character. Why are you having her on Star Trek: The Next Generation? She hates Data. Like, come on, we love Data.
Yeah.
So, but I know the first few episodes of season 3 were written with Pulaski in it, but then they were rewritten when Maurice Hurley left the series and Gates McFadden was invited back. From what I understand, it was Patrick Stewart had contacted Rick Berman and said, hey, we have Maurice Hurley gone now. Can we bring back Gates? Because I think our company probably works better with her than it does with Diana Muldaur. So So that's
Yeah.
what I think that's the genesis of the story regarding Gates McFadden's return to Star Trek after a 1 year absence. So and then the rest is history. I mean, she was written a lot better from that point on.
Yeah.
From season 3
Yeah,
onwards.
I had to
She's written
learn from
better.
that.
Yeah, she's written a lot better from season 3 onwards, except for that one show from season 7. Didn't Night That Candle, the Sub Rosa, the one with with that life form ghost episode. It's just a mess.
There's a bunch of those sprinkled throughout series of just like really wacky episodes. That should be an episode. That should be one of our podcast episodes is talking about wackiest episodes of each series, because there are some that are definitely like their cult favorites because of how dumb they are.
Yeah, definitely. We can definitely talk about that because I don't mind reusing topics I had from my previous Star Trek podcast. Like this is like we're going to talk about today is actually a reuse of that topic from that earlier podcast I did. So, because it's important to talk about LGBT representation. It's important because it's June. It's always Pride Month, I think, worldwide.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, let's get into the episode. Okay, LGBT representation in Star Trek. So there aren't a lot. There's only
because
one.
of Rick Berman. It's all because of Rick Berman.
It's all because of him. Oh. It's all because of him and Maurice Hurley, I think.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to go back a little bit in time here. During the first season of Next Generation, David Gerrold, who had written the original series episode, The Trouble with Triples, was invited back to develop Next Generation with Dorothy Fontana, Eddie Milkis, and Gene Roddenberry, and Robert Justman. And one of the episodes that David Gerrold had written for the first season is an episode called Blood and Fire. It was an episode about the AIDS epidemic, which was very prevalent in the late 80s. And yes, you just said,
it was specifically tied to the gay community during that time, unfortunately, because that's where it started. So everyone is afraid to touch the topic.
Yep. So, and I know that during the launch of Next Generation, I remember stories that Gene Roddenberry had spoken to many fans and one of the fans spoke up at a convention saying, "Are you going to bring gay characters in Star Trek? Because we want to be represented too." And he said, "Yeah, we'll definitely do that." But then certain things happen, and the Blood and Fire episode is written, but is never filmed. It's written, but it's never filmed. It was written for the first season, and it was never really developed. It's actually one of the lost episodes of Next Generation. I think there's one book about all the unproduced episodes of Star Trek from the original series all the way to Next Generation, and one of them is unfortunately Blood and Fire. It was reworked into an episode of the fan series Star Trek Phase 2, which was developed by James Cawley, a big fan of Next Generation. He was actually on the production staff at the time, like costume design, or like part of the costuming department on Next Generation, because he was interviewed for the 40th anniversary special for History Channel back in 2006, and he had costumes he had bought from the Phase 2 television series that was never made. And he was talking about, he said that he was a costume assistant on the Next Generation during the first season. And so it was reworked into that series, that web series. It's a really good two-parter. It was written into a two-parter I think it was originally written for a two-parter in the first season of Next Generation too. But David Gerrold kept the story. He worked it into a book series called The Star Wolf too. and stuff like that. But he eventually developed it for the Phase 2 web series in 2013. So long before the whole fan guidelines came out and stuff like that. I don't want to get into it because I have a very strong opinion about that.
Oh.
I really do. I mean, granted, I never donated to Axanar, but I'm not going to divulge about that right now because it's not important. So the late 80s, Blood and Fire is written, never made. Unfortunately, it was nixed by both Rick Berman and Maurice Hurley, unfortunately. And
which spoke to the fact that it was definitely because of it being associated with the gay community. Mm-hmm. Like, that's probably the worst part about it, because like nowadays, like, we know that AIDS is not judgmental. It doesn't care, but it just happened to start in the gay community, and for a long time was deemed a disease that only happened to people who were homosexual, which that's not true. But at the time, it was just such a controversial thing, which I think now in the 21st century, we're still dealing with people having issues with people being not heterosexual. Is wild to me, but at least it's better now where people don't really bat an eye as much. But the representation does matter, because we never had an actual like canonical like gay couple until Discovery, technically.
Yep.
There have been flirts of other characters that have sort of had that chemistry, but then have been kind of written off because of the same controversy around being like, this might make some of our audience members feel uncomfortable, so let's not pursue it any longer.
Yeah, and so we don't get one until Discovery, but we like in Stamets, or that's what fans of Discovery call Culber and Stamets is.
Yep.
Like Stamets, like Stamets, like they do for
half their name.
Yeah, they do like for like
a couple's name,
like they do for like super couples in Hollywood. Like when Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie were married, Brangelina was the key word. So like that. So I say now that episode could have been made today. Like, Blood and Fire could have been made today. If Next Generation was made today, definitely would have been made. In this 21st century era of acceptance of everybody, regardless of who you love or who you're with, or something like that. It could have been.
And then it really shouldn't. And then it's supposed to be something that's supposed to like be not a big deal. Like, I really liked, even though it was something that wasn't really a big deal to make, and it was a sort of a nod to George Takei to be able to like make Sulu in J.J. Abrams' universe his character gay, just like offhandedly, but like in a way that's like, it's not driving his character to be like, this is exactly how he needs to be because of him being gay. He's the exact same character as he was. It just so happens that in some like little off scene, you notice that he has a husband. And I really like that representation, because it's meant to be like showing that it's totally normal, like, and it isn't something that has to like, one's sexuality doesn't have to drive and write their entire character. Like, who you're attracted to shouldn't be a deciding basis of like how people perceive you.
Yes. So definitely that's always a good thing, because I remember I remember when he was on the original series, George Takei had actually approached Gene Roddenberry and said, "Hey, can you make Sulu gay?" Because he wanted to be himself. You're going
early.
We're going like a little bit too early for that, George.
Which is sad. Like, it's tough that's like, because he didn't officially come out until like 2000s, right?
Yeah, and until the 21st century, like 2004 or 5.
It does suck. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. Like, even though Gene Roddenberry was pretty forward thinking, he was still something where he was like, the fact that just because he loved men, it was suddenly like pissing like, oh, we don't want to touch that though, we might get canceled. Like we already went through that once, let's not push it again, so let's just leave it.
Yeah, exactly. And this was actually during I think they did the first season too of the original series, because they're going like, our ratings are so low, if we have you be gay, that's the end of us. So That's the end of, Star Trek, everything, and, it's
And
like,
it's
okay.
just
And
so
he
funny because the
understood.
irony of like all the fan service around like Kirk and Spock in the beginnings of Star Trek, and how that was such a big deal
Mhm.
to writing like fan fiction between those two. Like if
Yeah.
it wasn't for the popularity around this show with people writing stuff like that and being invested in these characters, Star Trek probably would have never made it. And it's just
Yeah.
like you realize this is all built on people loving these characters and imagining them being together because there's such a good chemistry between them. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I remember like certain things from For the Love of Spock documentary, in which Adam Nimoy brings up, Leonard's son brings up the Kirk Spock slash fiction
Yep.
aspect, and he said that there was a really good YouTube video about it, taking scenes completely out of context from the original series and turning it into um, a homosexual love for both Kirk and Spock. The slash fiction, it can be kind of graphic, but they took scenes out of the original series that are completely out of context and mashed them all together to make it look like a
Yeah.
Kirk Spock slash fiction video. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and
I mean,
that's
it's like
yeah.
it's so sad that it was such a societal issue, like such a societal wall that was hit. Because even Gene Roddenberry was like fully on board with shipping
Hmm.
Kirk and Spock as a couple, being like, "Oh, that's cool, let's do it. Like, this is what the fans want." But then it's like, oh, but socially, the majority of people would be super uncomfortable with this. So I guess we're just gonna have to say sorry, fans, and not write them that way. Because like
Yeah.
the beauty of having a show and having characters, especially when the fans are so invested, is you can write for the fans and you can make a show that is curated to what people want to see.
Yeah.
And for years, there was definitely a dissonance between that because
Hmm.
they just never wrote characters that the people that watch the show, like the demographic of people. And, it like representation can be so powerful. And you
Hmm.
even like something like seeing a black captain, seeing a woman captain, like those are big deals. But the one that was like just starkly unaddressed was people's sexuality
Hmm.
and how that looks. And I think that that's something like at least Discovery, which that's what Discovery also gets. Like the thing that people feared happening to Star Trek throughout the years by introducing more controversial things like sexual orientation is now what Discovery is under fire for by their more conservative demographic of people watching the show. But they can
Yeah.
handle it because at least we realize that the majority of people are pretty cool about
Hmm.
accepting people for who they are. So
Yeah.
that's what, if anything, Star Trek's proven that.
Yeah, exactly. And I completely agree with you, Kenzie, on that. Because I know that the conservative side of the fans who are watching Discovery are, unfortunately, I'm just going to say this, are the ones who say, "Oh, I hate Discovery," because of
Mm-hmm.
that. And, they're the ones who said that, "Oh, I saw the first episode, I hate the rest of it. It's not my Star Trek." And I just say that's a general thing I've seen on comments over the last 5 years since Discovery was announced and stuff like that, and um, I've seen a lot of hate for Discovery is mostly on the people who are on that side of the fandom. Um, the more conservative leaning side politically, who watch Star Trek. And there's a general thing I've seen, and it's not like a definite thing. It's just like a general thing I've
It comes
seen.
with the territory.
Yep,
Being a show that's lasted so long, like the
55
series
years.
and stuff, yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna definitely pick up people who are living in the past.
Hmm.
Ironically enough, for a show that's supposed to be sci-fi and the future of humanity, there's
Hmm.
lots of people who still live in the past about what they expect things to be like. Which it's just so funny to me because it's like, why? What expectations can you possibly set for a show that's supposed to take place during this time period? And like, why would that be considered weird? Like, that's how you know you're stuck in the past if you can't accept those things.
Yeah, and there's those fans who have never fully accepted everything after the end of Enterprise in 2005. Um, Everyone thinks like, oh, Star Trek died when J.J. Abrams took over. No.
Not even close.
In fact, he pretty much brought the franchise back from its deathbed.
Yeah,
So,
he introduced a whole new generation of fans because that was pretty much how all my friends like Star Trek is because of J.J. Abrams. If it wasn't for him, I'd still be my lone self in my friend group liking Star Trek.
yeah, exactly. So that's awesome. We talked about this before, without J.J. Abrams and George Lucas and other people as well involved with the start and Alex Kurtzman, probably without them, reinvigorating Star Trek for the modern age, probably Star Trek probably would have been just a cult show with 3 seasons worth of shows, and that was it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think like Star Trek is littered with a lot of examples of trying to keep up with the times, like weirdly enough trying to reflect current situations projected into the future. Like, I mean, that's kind of the whole point. Like Blood and Fire is supposed to be written, in the time period of Star Trek, which I mean, would AIDS still be around by then? But still, how to contextualize something that's currently happening in the world in the future and still make it something that people can be like, this is about what's happening right now. I get it. Like, and having those self-reflections on current times through the writing. There's another episode of Next Generation that I think of, and this is a little more just like around like just the span of sexuality and like how not everybody fits certain gender norms even. And it's the episode with Riker where he meets the androgynous androgynous species.
Yep.
And it's like, but then the outcast, and that there's this whole affair that happens between them, but then they freak out about like Soren dating or like being with Riker, and it's just it's what it pretty much talking about that, like we're trying to defend someone's right to love regardless of sex or gender, or the lack thereof, like just not having any involved either. But that itself was a pretty daring episode, I'd say.
Yep.
But it's still not, because they still made Soren pretty, like, even though it's supposed to be androgynous, they definitely made Soren more feminine, which is a little easier to take. But it's just, they tried, but it was like not notable enough. Like they could have definitely played off of that a bit more, being like, hey, like gender is just some trivial concept, and especially in the 24th century, like how in the world is that not something that just doesn't really exist anymore?
Yeah, The Outcast is written by Jerry Taylor. I think that was one of her first few scripts that she written over the first two seasons she was part of. She joined the series in season 4. But this is actually the one that most people before Discovery cite as a very good representation of LGBTQ representation somewhat, even though it's kind of reverse, kind of, I think, because the alien species is androgynous, but there are a minority of people who have masculine inclinations, and there are ones like the one that Riker falls in love with, feminine ones. And there was I know there was a scene about the she's gonna be back to normal. So it's kind of like the conversion therapies that are highly controversial nowadays.
Therapy, which super messed up. So
but
it's that a reality of people still are dealing with that today, which is insane. But it's still an issue. And like speaking of like characters that kind of drift away from how they originally written, like that was one rare example of Riker not being a ladies' man, but Bashir in Deep Space Nine, written to definitely be a ladies' man, but one of those that when we talked about like who should have been more for LGBTQ representation would be Bashir and Garrick, because they obviously had chemistry, but then Rick Berman was like, yo, tone it down, Garrick, like we're not doing this, and then wrote them away to be back in their little heteronormative boxes.
Yes, definitely. Yep. And I know I mentioned that Alexander Siddig and Andrew Robinson has done a video in their characters doing like Bashir Garrick / fiction here. I haven't.
Which I absolutely love.
Yeah. So yeah, and I know a friend of mine, Jim Stoffel, had said like Garrick's omnisexual. Oh,
Yeah.
whatever.
Or like, yeah, like he's pansexual,
Hmm.
bisexual, like they being like that they love people regardless of the gender. And
Yeah.
I mean, even that's how I always took even Bashir, because Bashir just seems dazzled by everybody. Like he seems to love everyone for who they are. Like he just falls in love. He's a romantic, truly a romantic, like loves everyone he meets. Like, wow, amazing. I'm in love every time. I'm like, what an in love person.
Yeah.
But I think Derek is definitely one of my favorite characters in
Mhm.
all of Star Trek, just because of how he's written, and like that attempt at being like, hey, and that it doesn't have to define him either. Like I think that was the one nice thing where like they didn't play into like any stereotypes or being like pushing it super hard, just being like, hey, look, you can feel the chemistry, and chemistry is a completely normal thing for people to have. And
Mhm.
like these two characters, you can see it, like the writers caught it perfectly before
Yep.
Rick Berman cast it away into the fire, like you're like, no. But I mean, I think that's something that I'm glad Star Trek tried to like, dabble in, as well as even like polyamory. Like look at Phlox and Enterprise having 3 wives and just being a very sexually open person.
Mhm.
And I always liked how his character was too, because a lot of people, especially like those in the Federation, like especially Vulcans and humans, are very like conservative sexually, and then every time just dealing with him, they're like, oh boy, this guy is a lot.
Yeah.
But he's just very open and very like happy to be himself, and makes characters like question that.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that, when he's mentioned that he has 3 wives, and there's three, like Fox has 3 wives, and then there are 3 husbands for every wife. Uh, and I know there are characters in Enterprise who question that, going like, "Oh, your mating practices must be very, very complex," um, and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
and I know they had like there was one episode of Enterprise where one of his wives was flirting with Trip Tucker, and and he had to question Fox, going like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. She's your wife.
Fox is like, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Which I mean, that's another big aspect of like traditional like monogamy tends to be pretty closely tied to being heterosexual.
Hmm.
Like those two things go hand in hand,
Yeah.
and that's something too. Like with exploring non-heterosexual relationships, I feel like that often needs to be something that also is brought in, like that polyamory is another big thing, and non-monogamy, or not having relationships. There are people who are very open. Like I would say Bashir especially is one of those people. He's constantly dating throughout
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine, and he's always in love with people, and it never seems to end in any like bad way. He just is like picks up people he loves, and that's who he is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. And speaking of Deep Space Nine, there actually is an episode with a female same-sex kiss that was deemed controversial in 1995. The kiss
Yeah.
between Lenara Khan and Jadzia Dax, and the whole thing about
Oh yeah, and then Jadzia too is another big lesbian
yeah,
that's non-binary too.
yeah, she was like, anyway, she dated a lot of characters who were off screen, like the one with the transparent skull, and you know,
Their meeting, I love like her date. The whole thing, I love her being with Worf because it really addresses this whole thing of like the differences in people's past. Like the fact that she dates mostly men. Like I identify with Jadzia because I'm bisexual and I've dated mostly men, and that's how she's written. But she's had like female partners or like non-male partners when
hmm.
they go to that one planet, the Paradise Planet, and they go on
Yep.
vacation. They run into whatever previous lovers, and Worf is completely taken aback and thrown off and upset about her having been with this female, and him being really upset about it, all up in arms, and then wants to like work with all the conservative people trying to ruin the planet, like to get them off of there. But it's like, I like that because there is this sense that there's a lot of people that identify with Worf, like the very traditionalist like view of what it means to be in love and having a relationship and like co-creating, and it's a very different view than Jadzia, who Dax has been around for a long time, and Jadzia is just another aspect of that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's kind of crazy that, certain things have like, gotten to this, like certain things, and I don't know what to say. But I just lost my train of thought. Well, I meant to mention before when we were talking about Blood and Fire, if it had been produced and aired in 1988, it probably would have gotten acceptance from the LGBTQ community at the time, but then it would have caused a lot of headaches, because of the controversial nature of the subject at the time.
Yeah.
And
if it would have waited a little bit longer until it really became deemed like an actual pandemic instead of, or like an epidemic, rather than just being something that people would go, haha, like this is that's what you get type of thing that the conservatives carried with that whole thing. Like the fact that Reagan refused to even acknowledge AIDS until the first non-sexual transmission of it had happened, and then realized, oh, this is a disease of blood, not sexuality, like thinking that it's a disease because you're gay versus it's a disease because it doesn't discriminate. It's just about blood.
Yeah, so, exactly. And unfortunately my uncle died of AIDS, so
yeah,
in the 90s. So yeah, so it affects anybody, so everybody, somehow, because it's still an epidemic even 30 years later.
We can manage it. You can at least, it's not a death sentence as it was 30 years ago, but it's still like 30, 40 years ago, but it's still, it's something that carries a pretty heavy life sentence with it, of being like, you're gonna have to be on medication the rest of your life. And it's still something that plays, but it still disproportionately affects the gay community, unfortunately. But it's not something to suddenly, judge anybody who's not straight for, having, because being straight doesn't mean you're somehow magically immune from AIDS and that you're not going to get it. And it's like, and I think that's the thing that people just couldn't wrap their heads around when it first happened. And that's why it's disappointing to see, like, I get why they were resistant to write such an episode given the time period, and even the fact that I think even something like that written now, at least it would be fine. But there's still like a lot of negative sentiment around like representation of non-straight people in media, where a lot of people get angry about it being like that it's just lip service to like, like make like being a people pleaser, which what's wrong with that? That's the whole point of media on television, right? Like,
yeah,
to please the fans. But a lot of people get angry about it, just like what we were talking about earlier with a lot of more conservative Star Trek fans being like, I don't like Discovery because they just keep putting people in to like represent others. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point. Like,
yeah,
I mean, you're criticizing for them for something that's literally the intention, and that's a positive thing. Like, representation does matter.
Yeah, it does matter, because we don't want, I mean, I feel personally, like, because I have family who are in that community. So
growing up in a rural area, it's inevitable.
Yeah, I have actually, my brother's transgender himself, but I have a brother who is transgender. But so that representation matters because it's like it speaks to them, and stuff like that. So yeah, it would have caused a major headache for Paramount at the time if it was made. It would have been like I don't know, maybe Next Generation probably would have been known for, if it had been made, probably Next Generation probably wouldn't have survived 7 years. It probably would have been known as a show that, like, they tried this controversial show and we hate it, so we're gonna have it canceled.
Yeah.
which I know, which is typical of those ones the comments you see on internet forums today, going like, "Oh, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure Alex Kurtzman and CBS Alex Kurtzman is fired from Discovery and Star Trek because he's ruining Star Trek." And it's like, oh my gosh, he's brought the Star Trek franchise to an exploitative level, exploitative level. Like, like I said, we have like 5 shows in development or active production. So
yeah, and that it's speaking to people. Like,
yeah,
I feel like a lot of like some of the best fans of Star Trek are people who have felt, sidelined by society. And that's why they like Star Trek. It gives a hopeful view of the future, of being more accepting, and that your identity, whether it's your gender identity, your sexual identity, any of that doesn't matter. Like, you're just who you are, because not every species is going to be like a binary species, or like any sort of like non-consecutive gender like species. Like, I think that's the thing that we get out of something like sci-fi, where no alien species is probably going to be a lot like us. Like, sure, there in Star Trek we have a lot of humanoid species that are very similar to us, like, and almost even culturally similar, that we can totally like understand where they're coming from. But things like the Trill, or even like Borg, like, I mean, they're even trying to dabble with that a little bit, like Seven of Nine and Ruffy a little bit there at the end of the card, where I'm like, and like, I think that's just like who's to say that, I mean, Seven of Nine can't love whoever she wants, because she spent most of her life being Borg, and Borg, that is not, sexuality doesn't even exist in the Borg hive mind, because they just assimilate things, and that's how they procreate, so to speak. So there's no semblance of sexuality or intimacy like that, except just being in a hive mind. So I think that's a super cool way to like open up her character a little bit, being like, what is it like for someone who spent their entire life basically being not really like asexual? There is just no perception of sexuality, and now you're open to it. Like, I thought that was super nice.
Yeah, and I've seen like a lot of like I follow this like I know there's a lot of like during the like, now that Voyager's been off the air for 20 years now, as of last week, as of this recording, been off air for 20 years. I see a lot of Janeway and Seven / fiction too.
Yeah.
A lot of that. It's the same kind of.
My favorite thing about Star Trek is people writing / fiction. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful fan service. Thank you to anybody who writes that, because yes, awesome.
Yeah, like I've seen videos, I've seen artwork taking things out of context from scenes from interactions between Janeway and Seven, and turning it into / fiction. So, which is a good thing. It's speaking to that community. Like, like, I honestly didn't know you were bisexual until right now. I'm today years old when I know that. But
and I think that's like an important part of it, that it shouldn't have to be something that people have to know. But then if you do know it, it's not, it's not something that has to define you. If it does, that's also cool too, because some people, their journey to their sexuality is a big part of their identity. Like, if you grew up in an area where you were shamed or like persecuted for being that way, then that's a huge part of your identity, and you should be proud of it. But like, and like, I'm proud of it, but it's just like, it's not something that's a big deal to me. Like, I'm like, yeah, I like men and women. Like, I don't know, I would almost say that I fall more on like a pansexual thing. Like, I can only like ever really like somebody after I've met them and gotten to know them, and emotionally be attached to them first. Like, I can't be as like, I'm not as sexually attracted to people right off the bat. I just want to talk to people and get to know them.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important thing for people to understand that it's not a big deal. Like, and I think people who still struggle with that should watch things like Star Trek, or, look to fans of Star Trek to see that that's what people are looking for, to be accepted, not necessarily put up on a pedestal, but just accepted,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I think we're about to wrap this one up. Any final thoughts, Kenzie?
If anybody out there listening has ever written any fan service about any of your characters or any characters that you wish to ship as couples, I want to hear it. Because, like 7 of 9 Janeway, or a continuation of Garrick and Bashir, or I've seen people make jokes about like Bashir and Quark, like anything like that. I'm like, I want to hear it. Like, I think it's great to hear people's like fanfic shipped characters, because that's the beauty of Star Trek, is the fan service that they contribute to Star Trek.
Yes, definitely. It's always sold, and every convention you think of. Granted, there's no conventions right now because of COVID, but they're coming back slowly because of COVID. The pandemic's easing here in the United States.
Yeah,
but
at least in Minnesota, pretty easy though.
Yeah, at least for that. Yeah, definitely. But I know that that artwork and fan fiction is always sold at conventions. I've seen that on like documentaries about Star Trek fandom and stuff like that, saying like, oh, here's like this like picture of Seven and Janeway making love. Here it is for like $50. Here it is. There you go.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So that's my final thought about that. Like, I'm with you, Kenzie. If anybody out there has like any fan fiction sites or anything like that, direct them to us and we'll definitely look at it. Definitely like that. So next week, episode 17. Wow. I'm just surprised we've done this many episodes. It's gonna be about the fathers of Star Trek. It's a celebration of Father's Day. Granted, it's later on in June, but it was just like, I just want to take care of this now. I would like to take care of this now. So I just like felt like talk about
trying to take care of things in the past. We're kind of playing a game of time travel here.
Yes.
We gotta record in the past to prepare for the future. So
yes,
we are preparing.
Yes, it's later on in June, but we're doing it today because we're just gonna talk about the fathers and father-like figures of Star Trek. And I know there's like a ton of those, at least a few of them. At least I should say a ton.
Not necessarily though in a good light compared to a lot of the mothers of Star Trek. I think that's the big notable thing of like a lot of iffy fathers figures in Star Trek.
All right, so until next week, take care and live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.